DevOps Shorts, the show to listen to when your DevOps hurts. And even when you're going strong, it's short and sweet, so come along.
Hello, folks, and welcome to DevOps Shorts, the show where we invite wonderful human beings to have a lightning short talk about devs, ops, and other mythical creatures. The show where each episode only lasts 15 minutes and we're only focused around asking 3 questions. Why? Well, it's because if there's one thing we know, it's that great delivery comes in small batches. And I'm thrilled to say that our guest for today is Mark Burgess. That Mark, on your website, it said that you're a technologist, scientist, and author specializing in the physics of information systems. But to our audience, you're probably most known as the creator of CFEngine and the person who defined what we now know as desired state configuration management. And maybe also as the author of Promise Theory, which I've seen mentioned quite a number of times at DevOps conferences. I actually mentioned it in my talks a number of times myself. So, Mark, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks so much for the invitation.
So without further ado, we'll jump into our 3 questions. You have 4 minutes for each one of them, and we'll have Blitz questions in the end if we have time left over from the questions. So my first question is, why do you love information technology? From reading your bio, I know that you actually switched from physics to computers at a certain point in your career, and then probably went back to physics and then found a way to mix it all. But I realized that something in IT probably attracted you. So why do you love information technology?
I'm not sure I always do love it. It's more of a love-hate thing, I think. But in fact, I can remember vowing never to get involved in IT when I was 18, sitting in a school physics class. But a year later, I'd already written my first book on assembler programming for EEPROM chip arrays. So it happened very suddenly.
Ooh.
Actually, language was the hook for me originally. My first program was a drum machine with a language for music, and then it was an adventure game with interpreting human language. And then I got interested in programming languages. And then much later, I thought of processes as a kind of a life form that you could mess with, and perform hideous, mad science experiments on ethically, or at least for the time being before they get too smart, I suppose. But it's a place where you could try out all kinds of crazy ideas, simulate stuff, calculate answers to problems, visualize stuff. And I would say my love of programming waxes and wanes a bit, but increasingly I'm interested in the big picture. So as you mentioned, I started out as a quantum physicist, and I got into IT because I could see that physics was going to be important to understand in IT. And, my superpower, if I have one, is perhaps to see connections where most people just see irrelevance, for better or for worse. I mean, sometimes people find that annoying, but it is me. And in the past few years, as cloud came along, has come to the fore, I've been able to see the connection between scaling, fundamental virtual processes, layers to the story, and seeing how space and time and the subatomic realm might all sort of come together in this story about how we understand systems. And in fact, last year I wrote a book called Smart Spacetime, which is, it's a story that I've been wanting to explore for a long time. So that's really how I got into it. And it's that big picture view of the world that I find fascinating with IT.
Fascinating. And now you also have the series on YouTube, right? That it's loosely based on the things that you're saying in Smart Spacetime.
That's right. I've been making these documentaries for fun.
And putting them up on the cloud, so to close the loop, so to say.
I very much hope people will enjoy them and see a little bit of the world as I begin to see it.
There's so much information to process there, and they really give this feeling of information and space and time getting all connected. And yeah, Wonderful. Okay, we still have about a minute left from this question, so we'll use it in the end and go straight to our next question, which is, what was your DevOps aha moment? So this is a show about DevOps. I haven't heard you talking about DevOps too much, but I'm sure you're aware, again, the desired state configuration management tools were at the dawn of the DevOps movement. So that's probably one of the reasons why your name comes up here and now at DevOps conferences. Did you have the DevOps moment?
Yeah, I don't think I ever had a single aha moment because, as a researcher, you don't really stop digging away at things. It's more like a continuous improvement, continuous integration, continuous delivery of ideas. So you could see how some of those ideas would appeal to me once they started to become more popularized. I think that part of it immediately appealed to my sensibility. As far as the automation story is concerned, I was perhaps early in recognizing the importance of automation, but I came later to the discussion of the social and agile processes, that part of the connection that others have, Patrick Dubois, Andrew Clay Schaefer, and those folks have been advocating and focusing on. And that interest came out of my work on promise theory, as I began to see the relationships between technology and humans, and see IT not just as IT, but as human IT systems, human machine systems. That's how I like to think of things. And my background in IT started sort of with development, writing these soft programs I mentioned earlier. But I only really got interested in when I got interested in ops, I suppose, managing systems, sysadmin. And I realized that we were still slave to a lot of wizardry and individual egos getting in the way of progress. Systems were being ruled by these wizards, and infrastructure had to be automated. Services needed to be made more self-service. So you didn't have to sort of kneel and kiss the ring of the wizard to get what you needed to do your job. And today people are still doing a pretty miserable job of managing the totality of technology and the human-computer interaction. And cloud and technology is still way too hard. I think it makes IT processes vulnerable to these difficulties and the expense of it all, and finding people who are competent enough to make it happen. So there's a long way to go in the commoditization of IT. And I keep coming up with ideas there, but folks are generally too busy or invested in other things to show much interest beyond, a yearly time frame. So I suppose I have this reputation for being a kind of future-looking person, but most people I think are not. So I think that's partly where we get stuck.
Okay, wonderful. I love the fact that you mentioned future, because that's exactly what our third question is concerned with. So I'm stopping the timer again. We didn't hit the gong. And we're going to the third question. And that question is about the future. I also love, thinking about the future, imagining what the future will look like in relation to information technology, without any relation to information technology, with relation to how the way we humans interact will change. And that's why now I'm asking you, what do you think the future holds for, if it's for DevOps and the way we collaborate in IT, if it's for information technology in general, if it's for cloud or whatever other trends? I'm sure you have a lot to say in this matter, and go.
We think of IT as being this fast-moving, cutting-edge part of our lives, but it actually moves very slowly. And I've always been kind of 10 years ahead of where I'm supposed to be thinking about stuff. And it's slow because it has a kind of sociological inertia. And like all things in society, I suppose, for each innovation, we spend years trying to figure out how to turn it back into what we had before, because we don't really like the new things. And this has certainly been the case in configuration management and the management in operations in general. And in Western society, the developed world, if you like, we're far too pleased with ourselves, and it's dominated by money and not by innovation, which means that people are often surprisingly conservative, not wanting to disrupt their revenue streams. And this 21st century schizoid culture that we have is also quite proud of its ignorance. In a way, I noticed that in the 21st century, everyone thinks they have everything they need at their fingertips. They don't need to learn anything new. And all the kids straight out of college think they have all the answers and can reinvent the wheel. You know, when I wrote CFEngine back in 1993, there was still room for that kind of big idea. But now that the big tech firms have kind of taken over the show, innovation and the narrative around innovation has been taken over by them. You know, if a project doesn't come out of Google or Amazon or Facebook or whatever, then why should we care? And most people look to those projects from those places, and the original kind of open source innovator has become overshadowed by that, I think. So, you know, it's about community and brands and populism, not so much about merit, which means that we're very wasteful and we focus on perhaps sometimes the wrong thing. And these documentaries that you mentioned earlier, I've tried to focus a bit on the inefficiencies of IT. And one of the things I hope for the future is that we waste less resources. We come back to this idea of efficiency and reduce the magnitude of energy and resources that we waste in carrying out processes, both human processes and machine processes, but mainly on the programming side, and not try to solve every problem by brute force, but rather try to find those minimalistic, parsimonious ways that we did in the era of assembler programming where I started, you know, my career, if you will, dignified by any such title. I do also think we need to look away from IT a bit. We're a bit too focused on that. There are other challenges out there, and, you know, other than playing with Kubernetes clusters, that can make society a better place. And in some ways, technology, you know, sows divisions and not harmony amongst our society. And many years ago, I wrote a book, Slogans, which is a kind of a fictional parody of that process. And I still see the effects of that, you know, many years later, how our reliance on technology has turned us into a worse society, a less people-oriented society than we were before we had all this technology. So I do hope for the future that we can become better people.
It sounds a little bit like you hope for that, but you're not very, very hopeful, not very optimistic.
Well, we live in interesting times, do we not? Especially, you know, since the current crisis of the COVID-19 and being locked down, and the role of populism in spreading the good, the bad, and the ugly, but more ugly than good, I would say. Around the world, in all countries, you know, this has become an issue, and I think...
Here's our gong. Sorry to cut this important, deep thought, but now we're going to the Blitz. Now, in the Blitz, I'll be asking all kind of stupid questions, and you try to answer them as short as possible, okay?
Yes.
Okay, so the first question is, if I ask you if I should buy cryptocurrency, would you say yes or no?
No.
No, okay, good. Now, what's in your opinion the most exciting tech outside of IT?
Whoa, that's interesting. I suppose biotechnology has to be the winner there.
Okay, wonderful. And okay, yeah, I lost my questions. So I don't know how many online conferences you've attended or talked at lately. I happen to do this a lot since COVID is here. But what do you say, online conferences or offline ones?
Oh, I like both, actually. There's definitely no substitute for meeting people in real life, if you call that real. But the ability to reach across the planet in an instant, just like we're doing now, is invaluable. It's going to
be... Yeah, I agree. And here's our gong. Okay, Mark, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, the pleasure was mine,
interesting,
sir.
As always, exciting, thrilling. very deep. Of course, I feel like we didn't have enough time, but then that was the whole idea.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Short and sweet. Thank you for listening and watch out for new episodes of DevOps Shorts.